The massive alien ship appeared without warning on a cold morning in December. It was larger than anything humanity had ever built, stretching across the sky like a floating city made of dark metal and strange lights. People around the world stopped what they were doing and looked up. Some prayed. Some screamed. Most simply stared in silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. Jake Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee when his phone rang. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations, a job that usually meant endless meetings and careful speeches. But today would be different. Today would change everything. "Sir, you need to come to the command center immediately," said the voice on the phone. "They're asking to speak with our leader." Jake set down his coffee and took a deep breath. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer, and somehow he had to figure out what to say. The alien who appeared on the screen called himself Ambassador Kethrol. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 eyes that blinked in pairs. He spoke through a translation device that turned his clicking sounds into perfect English. Behind him stood others of his kind, watching with expressions that seemed almost bored. "We are the Vorani Collective," Kethrol said. "We speak on behalf of the Galactic Council, which has governed this region of space for 10,000 of your years. We have been watching your species for some time now. You have grown quickly. Too quickly." Jake kept his face calm even though his heart was racing. "We are honored to make contact with other intelligent life. Perhaps we can discuss." "There will be no discussion," Kethrol interrupted. "We are here to deliver terms, not to negotiate. You will surrender all territory beyond your planet's moon. You will dismantle all military vessels. You will accept permanent observer status under Council supervision. Your species will be contained until you prove yourselves worthy of greater freedom." The room went silent. Jake looked at the generals and advisors standing around him. Their faces showed the same shock he felt. "And if we refuse?" Jake asked. Kethrol tilted his head as if the question confused him. "No species has ever refused the Council. You are young and ignorant. So I will explain clearly. We have weapons that can turn your cities to glass. We have ships that can block out your sun. Refusal is not survival. It is extinction." Jake thought about his daughter, who was probably watching this broadcast like everyone else on Earth. He thought about all the generations who had come before, who had fought and struggled and dreamed of reaching the stars. He thought about what it meant to be human. "I need time to consult with my government," Jake said. "You have 1 rotation of your planet," Kethrol replied. "We will expect your surrender by then." The screen went dark. For the next 20 hours, the world argued. Some said they should accept the terms and survive. Others said they should fight and die free. The debates grew heated. Old enemies who had spent decades threatening each other suddenly found themselves on the same side. Deep beneath a mountain in Colorado, Admiral Ryan Cole watched the arguments with tired eyes. He was 62 years old and had spent his entire career preparing for a war he hoped would never come. But it had come. And now he had a decision to make. "Show them the files," he said to his aide. The young officer hesitated. "Sir, those files are classified at the highest level. Even most of the Joint Chiefs don't know." "Show them," Cole repeated. "If we're going to fight, they need to know what we have." The files revealed a secret that had been kept for almost a century. When the first alien signals were detected in 2157, governments around the world had made a choice. They would prepare. Quietly, carefully. They had built hidden shipyards in the asteroid belt. They had developed weapons based on crashed alien scout vessels. They had created a planetary shield network that covered every major city. Humanity had known this day would come. And humanity had gotten ready. When Jake Morrison appeared on screens around the world to deliver Earth's response, he looked directly into the camera. His voice was steady and clear. "To the Galactic Council and all who serve it, we have heard your demands. We have considered your threats. And we have made our decision." In orbit above Earth, Commander Lisa Grant stood at her station on Defense Platform 7. She was 34 years old and had never fired a weapon in combat. But her hand was steady as she waited for the signal. "We are humanity," Jake continued. We were born on a world that tried to kill us with ice and fire and disease. We survived. We grew. We reached out to the stars not because it was easy, but because we refused to accept limits. We do not kneel. We do not surrender. We do not ask permission to exist. Kethril watched the broadcast with growing confusion. This was not how young species behaved. They should be begging for mercy, not standing tall with fire in their eyes. Your terms are rejected, Jake said. Every single one. If you want Earth, you will have to take it. And I promise you this. The cost will be higher than you can imagine. The alien ships began charging their weapons. Kethril gave the order to fire a warning shot, just to show these primitive creatures what they faced. Lisa Grant saw the energy building in the alien weapon systems. She took a breath and pressed the activation button. A shimmering barrier of blue light appeared around the planet, stretching from pole to pole. The alien weapon hit the shield and scattered like water against stone. The massive blast that should have destroyed a city simply faded away into nothing. For a long moment, no one spoke. On the alien ship, officers stared at their screens in disbelief. Their weapons had worked on 100 worlds. Nothing had ever stopped them before. Kethril felt something he had not felt in centuries. Something cold and unfamiliar growing in his chest. Fear. He looked at the blue planet below, at the shield that protected it, at the defiance in the eyes of the human leader. In 10,000 years, the Council had never faced anything like this. Report to the High Command, Kethril said quietly. Tell them we may have a problem. On Earth, people were cheering in the streets. They did not know what was coming. They did not understand that this was only the beginning. But for this moment, they celebrated the simple fact that they were still alive and still free. Jake Morrison watched the alien ships from his window. He knew the real fight had not yet started. He knew millions might die before this was over. But he also knew something else. Something he felt deep in his bones. Humanity would not go quietly into the darkness. Whatever came next, they would face it standing up. The stars had sent their masters to claim Earth. Earth had said no. Now the galaxy would learn what that meant. The Galactic Council did not take failure well. When Ambassador Kethril reported that Earth had refused their demands and blocked their weapons, the 12 leaders of the Council gathered to discuss what to do next. The discussion was short. Destroy them, said High Admiral Zeth Mora of the Keldari Empire. Send the combined fleet. Crush them so completely that other young species will remember the lesson for 1,000 years. Within 2 weeks, over 3,000 warships from 5 different Council species gathered at the edge of Earth's solar system. It was the largest military force assembled in centuries. Zeth Mora commanded the fleet from his flagship, a massive vessel called the Unbreakable Will. He expected the campaign to last a few hours at most. He was very wrong. Admiral Ryan Cole watched the approaching fleet from the bridge of the carrier, Defiance. The old warship had been his home for almost a decade. Around him, officers worked at their stations with calm focus. They knew what was coming. How many do we have? Cole asked. 412 combat vessels, sir, replied his tactical officer. Another 200 support ships, plus the orbital platforms and ground-based weapons. Cole nodded. They were outnumbered almost 6 to 1. By any normal calculation, they should lose. But Cole had not spent 30 years preparing for a normal battle. Signal all ships, he said. Weapons free. Make them bleed for every inch. The Battle of Earth began above the Pacific Ocean on a Tuesday morning. The alien fleet came in a standard formation. Confident in their superior numbers and firepower, they expected the humans to form defensive lines and try to hold position. Instead, human ships scattered like angry hornets. They were smaller and faster than the Council vessels, designed for quick strikes and constant movement. They refused to stay still long enough to be targeted. They dove between enemy ships, firing at close range. Using the aliens' own fleet as cover, Lieutenant Katie Shaw flew a fighter barely bigger than a bus. She was 26 years old and had graduated top of her class at the academy. Her squadron was assigned to target enemy command ships. the massive vessels that coordinated the alien fleet. On the third day of battle, her fighter took heavy damage during an attack run. Her engines were failing. Her weapons were empty. The Keldari dreadnought ahead of her was beginning to turn, preparing to rejoin the battle after she had knocked out its main guns. Katie made a choice. She aimed her crippled fighter directly at the dreadnought's bridge and pushed the engines to full power. At the last possible second, she hit the ejection button. Her seat rocketed away as her fighter slammed into the alien ship's command center, creating an explosion that tore through 6 decks. The dreadnought drifted helplessly, its leadership destroyed. Katie floated in the cold darkness of space, her emergency beacon flashing, broadcasting on an open channel. "This is Shaw. Still alive. Still fighting. Come and get me if you can." She was rescued 3 days later by a passing patrol ship. The Keldari never forgot her name. By the 4th day, the Council fleet had lost over 1,000 ships. Zethmora could not understand what was happening. His sensors showed human vessels taking damage that should destroy them, only to keep fighting. He saw human pilots fly directly into his ships rather than retreat. He saw tactics that made no sense, strategies that seemed insane. What he did not understand was that humans had always been willing to die for what they believed in. They had done it throughout their history, in wars both noble and terrible. The Council species had evolved to survive at all costs. Humans had evolved to fight for things more important than survival. On the 5th day, Admiral Cole led a desperate attack against the alien flagship. The Defiance was old and slow, but its crew knew every system, every weakness, every trick the ship could perform. They flew directly into the heart of the enemy fleet. Cole stood on the bridge as explosions rocked his ship. Fires burned on 3 decks. Half his weapons were offline. But he kept pushing forward, drawing enemy fire away from the smaller ships that were tearing into the alien formation. "Sir, we've lost the port shields," someone reported. "Then turn our starboard side to them," Cole replied calmly. Engineering reports were venting atmosphere on decks 4 through 7. "Seal those sections. Keep firing." The Defiance survived that day, though barely. 1,047 crew members did not. Cole would carry their names with him for the rest of his life. On the 6th day, something changed. The alien attacks became less organized. Ships that should have pressed their advantage began to hesitate. For the first time, the Council fleet was afraid. They had never fought anyone like this. Other species surrendered when the odds turned against them. Other species valued their lives above all else. These humans seemed to value something more. Something the Council could not understand. Freedom, honor, the simple refusal to kneel. On the 7th day, High Admiral Zethmora gave an order that had not been given in 3 centuries. He ordered a full retreat. His fleet had lost more than 1/3 of its ships. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from 5 different species were dead. The mighty Council, which had ruled the galaxy unchallenged for 10,000 years, had been stopped by a single young species that had only been traveling between stars for 2 centuries. As the alien ships fled, Admiral Cole slumped in his command chair. His uniform was torn and stained with blood from a wound on his forehead. His ship was barely holding together. But he was smiling. "Send a message to Earth," he said. "Tell them we held. Tell them the fleet is retreating." Around the planet, the news spread like wildfire. People who had spent a week hiding in shelters emerged into the sunlight. They looked up at the sky and saw not defeat, but victory. Human ships were limping home, damaged but unbroken. The shield still shimmered around their world. Jake Morrison addressed the planet that evening. His face was tired, but his voice was strong. "Today we proved something to the galaxy," he said. "We proved that humanity will not be conquered. We proved that freedom is worth any price. We proved that the Council made a terrible mistake when they came to our door with threats instead of friendship." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "But we are not finished. The Council will return. They will bring more ships, more weapons, more soldiers. They think they can outlast us. They think they can wear us down." His eyes hardened. "They are wrong. Because we are not going to wait for them to come back. We are going to take this fight to them. We are going to show every enslaved species in the galaxy that the Council can be beaten, and we are going to tear down their empire piece by piece. In the ruins of the Council fleet, Zeth Mora listened to the broadcast. For the first time in his long life, he understood what it meant to face an enemy who would never stop fighting. The bloody week was over. The real war was about to begin. The Galactic Council expected humanity to celebrate their victory and stay home. They thought the young species would be satisfied with defending their little corner of space. They assumed that after the bloody week, humans would want peace and quiet. They could not have been more wrong. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, human fleets appeared in Council space. Not just 1 or 2 ships, but hundreds of warships that seemed to come from nowhere. The hidden shipyards in the asteroid belt had been working day and night, building vessels faster than anyone thought possible. But humanity did not come to conquer. They came to set people free. During the battle for Earth, human intelligence officers had captured data from destroyed alien ships. What they found in those files changed everything. The Galactic Council was not just a government, it was a prison. For 10,000 years, they had kept hundreds of species in chains, denying them technology, controlling their populations, crushing any attempt at independence. When Jake Morrison read those files, he felt sick. When he showed them to the people of Earth, they felt rage. General Sam Patterson had served in 3 wars before the aliens arrived. He was 55 years old, gray-haired, and tired of fighting. But when he learned about the enslaved species of the galaxy, he volunteered to lead the liberation campaign. His first target was Vex Prime, homeworld of the Vexari people. They were small beings, barely 3 feet tall, with large eyes and gentle voices. The Council had enslaved them 2,000 years ago for their skill at building delicate machinery. They had not known freedom in over 80 generations. Patterson landed on Vex Prime with 20,000 soldiers. The Keldari garrison there outnumbered him 3-1. They held fortified positions in the mountains and controlled the skies with fighter patrols. By any reasonable measure, the attack should have failed. It did not fail. Captain Ben Torres led his marine company into the mountain passes on the 2nd day of the invasion. Their mission was simple: hold the line, while Vexari civilians escaped from the combat zone. Intelligence said they would face light resistance. Intelligence was wrong. Torres and his 120 Marines found themselves facing almost 2,000 Keldari soldiers. The aliens had set a trap, hoping to destroy the human unit and break their advance. They attacked from 3 sides with overwhelming force. Torres gathered his people in a narrow pass between 2 cliffs. The position was good for defense but terrible for retreat. They had supplies for maybe 12 hours. Reinforcements were at least 18 hours away. "We hold here," Torres told his Marines. "Nobody gets through. Nobody." For 18 hours, they fought. Wave after wave of Keldari soldiers crashed against their position. Torres was wounded in the first hour, shot through the shoulder, but he kept fighting. He was wounded again in the 6th hour, a piece of shrapnel in his leg, but he refused to be carried to safety. By the 10th hour, they were running low on ammunition. By the 14th hour, they were using captured alien weapons. By the 16th hour, they were fighting hand to hand. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Torres sitting against a rock wall, his empty rifle across his lap. Around him lay the bodies of 47 Keldari soldiers he had killed in close combat after his ammunition ran out. He was covered in blood, most of it not his own, and he was still breathing. "Did they get through?" he asked the medic, who rushed to his side. "No, Captain. The civilians made it out. All of them." Torres smiled and closed his eyes. He would spend 3 months in a hospital recovering from his wounds. The Vexari would name their largest city after him. Across the planet, similar stories unfolded. Human soldiers fought and died for beings they had never met, species they had only learned about months ago. The Vexari could not understand it. Why would these strange tall creatures sacrifice themselves for strangers? The answer was simple, but the Council species could not grasp it. Humans had always been willing to fight for others. It was written into their history, into their stories, into their very nature. They saw suffering and felt compelled to stop it. They saw injustice and could not look away. When the Keldari garrison finally surrendered, General Patterson walked through the streets of the Vexari capital. The small beings gathered around him, reaching out to touch his hands, his uniform, as if to make sure he was real. An old Vexari, so ancient that his fur had turned completely white, approached Patterson with tears in his large eyes. "For 2,000 years, we prayed for someone to come," the old one said. "We prayed to gods we could not name, hoping for salvation. We had given up hope." Patterson knelt down to meet the old being's eyes. "You never have to pray for that again. You're free now. And we'll make sure you stay that way." The liberation of Vex Prime was broadcast across the galaxy. Enslaved species on 100 worlds saw human soldiers tearing down council flags and breaking the chains that had held generations in bondage. They saw the Vexari dancing in streets that had known only fear for 20 centuries. And they began to hope. The council demanded negotiations. They sent diplomats to Earth with offers of peace, promises of territory, threats of greater force to come. Jake Morrison listened to every word they said. Then he spoke a single word in response. No. The diplomats were confused. What did humans want, if not peace? What could they possibly hope to gain by continuing this war? Morrison explained it simply. "We don't want peace with slavers. We don't want territory stolen from free peoples. We want justice. We want every chain broken and every cage opened. We want the council to answer for 10,000 years of cruelty." He leaned forward, his voice hard as steel. "You came to Earth expecting us to bow. You found out we don't bow. Now you're going to find out what happens when humanity decides something is wrong. We don't stop. We don't compromise. We don't forgive." The diplomats returned to their masters with the news. The council had hoped to contain this conflict, to limit the damage, to find some way to preserve their power. That hope died with Morrison's words. Humanity was not fighting for territory or resources or pride. They were fighting because they believed the council was evil and had to be destroyed. There could be no negotiation with that kind of enemy. The war would continue until one side was completely broken. Across the galaxy, in slave quarters and prison camps, beings who had never known freedom whispered a new word to each other. A word that meant hope and terror and the promise of change. Human. The humans were coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy was burning, and the Galactic Council could not stop it. In the 18 months since humanity began its liberation campaign, everything had changed. Species that had accepted council rule for thousands of years were rising up. Slave revolts broke out on dozens of worlds. Military garrisons that had never faced real resistance suddenly found themselves fighting enemies on all sides. The careful order that the council had maintained for 10,000 years was falling apart. Dr. Amy Chen had spent her entire career studying life on other planets. Before the war, she had been a professor at a small university, teaching students about theoretical alien biology. Now she was humanity's chief ambassador to newly freed species, traveling from world to world to help them adjust to freedom. What she learned changed her understanding of everything. "Most species in the galaxy evolved differently than we did," she explained to Jake Morrison during a late-night meeting. "They developed rigid tribal instincts. They care deeply about their own families, their own groups, but they struggle to extend that caring to strangers. It's just how their brains work." Morrison nodded slowly. "And humans? We're different. Somehow, we developed the ability to feel empathy for beings we've never met. We see someone suffering, and we want to help, even if they look nothing like us, even if helping costs us everything." Amy shook her head in wonder. "The council species literally cannot understand why our soldiers die for strangers. It doesn't make sense to them. This was humanity's secret weapon. Not their ships or their shields or their willingness to fight. It was their capacity to care about others, to see injustice and feel compelled to stop it. No species in council space had ever encountered anything like it." Admiral Ryan Cole stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the carrier Unity. The Defiance had been too damaged to repair after the Battle of Earth, so they had given him a bigger ship with a crew of 5,000. He missed the old vessel. but he had to admit the unity had its advantages. He was looking at a map of the galaxy, watching the lines of Council control shrink day by day. His fleet had grown to over 1,000 ships, joined by vessels from 17 liberated species who wanted to fight alongside their saviors. "Sir, we have a communication from the Varani delegation," his aide reported. "They're requesting a meeting under a flag of truce." Cole raised an eyebrow. The Varani had been the Council's diplomats, the ones who had first demanded Earth's surrender. For them to request talks now meant the Council was truly desperate. "Send it to Secretary General Morrison," he said. "This is above my level." The Varani ambassador who appeared on the screen looked older than Kethral, with darker gray skin and eyes that seemed tired beyond measure. He introduced himself as High Minister Tevoran, the most senior diplomat in Council space. "We wish to discuss an end to this conflict," Tevoran said. "The Council recognizes that mistakes were made. We are prepared to offer significant concessions." Morrison listened as Tevoran outlined the offer. The Council would dissolve itself. All enslaved species would be immediately freed. Humanity would be granted a permanent seat on whatever new governing body replaced the Council. There would be reparations paid to damaged worlds. It was more than anyone had expected. It was, by any reasonable measure, a total victory. "And what happens to the individuals responsible?" Morrison asked quietly. Tevoran paused. "I do not understand the question. The leaders who ordered the enslavement, the commanders who destroyed worlds that resisted, the officials who profited from the suffering of billions." Morrison's voice was calm, but cold. "What happens to them?" "They would be retired from public service, given comfortable estates where they could live out their days in peace. They would be retired from public service. If you liked it, R5. They would be retired from public service." Morrison was silent for a long moment. "Minister Tevoran, do you know what we do on Earth with people who commit crimes against humanity? We put them on trial. We present evidence of what they did. We let their victims speak, and then we punish them according to the law. But these are the leaders of great civilizations," Tevoran protested. "They cannot be treated like common criminals." "That's exactly what they are. The only difference is the scale of their crimes." Morrison leaned forward. "Here is humanity's counteroffer. The Council dissolves immediately. All enslaved species are freed, and every Council leader, every military commander, every official who participated in the system of oppression, stands trial before a tribunal of their victims." Tevoran's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "That is impossible. Our leaders would never accept such terms. They would fight to the death first." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then we'll give them that death. Because humanity did not come this far to let monsters retire to comfortable estates. We came for justice. Real justice. The kind that holds the powerful accountable for what they've done." The diplomatic channel closed. Tevoran returned to Council Prime with humanity's answer. The Council leaders, faced with the choice between trial and war, chose war. It was the decision Morrison had expected. The Council had held power for so long that they could not imagine being judged by those they had oppressed. They would rather see the galaxy burn than face the consequences of their actions. Admiral Cole received his orders the next day. His fleet would strike at Council Prime itself, the heart of enemy power. It would be the largest battle in galactic history. On the eve of the assault, Cole walked through the corridors of the Unity, talking to his crew. He found them in the mess halls and the engine rooms, the fighter bays, and the medical centers. They were young and old, men and women, people from every nation on Earth and beings from a dozen liberated worlds. "Are you afraid?" he asked. A young pilot named Jenny Reyes. She thought about the question seriously. "Yes, sir. But not of dying. I'm afraid of failing. There are billions of people still in chains out there. If we lose, they stay that way forever." Cole put his hand on her shoulder. "We're not going to lose. You know why? Because we're fighting for something bigger than ourselves. The Council is fighting to keep what they stole. We're fighting to set people free. That's a difference no amount of ships can overcome." As the fleet prepared to jump to Council Prime, Cole stood on the bridge and looked at the stars. Tomorrow, millions might die. Tomorrow, the old order might fall forever. But tonight, the galaxy held its breath, and humanity moved forward, as it always had, toward the darkness that needed to be conquered. The final battle was coming, and nothing would stop them now. The Battle of Council Prime was the largest military engagement the galaxy had ever seen. On one side stood the combined fleet of humanity and 17 liberated species, over 2,000 ships carrying millions of soldiers. On the other side stood the remaining loyalist forces of the Council, everything they had left to throw at the coming storm. For 3 weeks, the space around Council Prime burned with weapons, fire, and dying ships. Admiral Ryan Cole commanded from the Unity, directing his forces with the calm precision of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. The Council defenders fought with desperate fury. They knew what waited for them if they lost. The tribunals, the trials, the judgment of all those they had wronged for 10,000 years. Death in battle seemed better than that kind of justice. But humanity did not care about what the Council preferred. They had not traveled across the galaxy to give their enemies an honorable end. Captain Nicole West was 31 years old and had been flying bombers since she was 19. Her mission on the 15th day of the battle was simple: deliver a payload that would breach the planetary shields protecting Council Prime. Without those shields, ground forces could land. The defensive fire around her target was the heaviest she had ever seen. Ships were dying all around her, torn apart by weapons that turned metal and flesh into scattered atoms. Her squadron started with 12 bombers. By the time they reached the target, only 3 remained. Nicole locked onto the shield generator and released her payload. The massive bomb flew true, striking the exact weak point that intelligence had identified. The shields flickered and died. She did not survive the return flight. A Council fighter caught her bomber just as she was turning for home. Her ship exploded in a flash of light that her wingmen would remember for the rest of their lives. But the shields were down, and ground forces were already dropping from orbit. Colonel Frank Adams led the assault on the Council citadel. He was 48 years old and had fought on 6 different worlds during the Liberation campaign. His soldiers trusted him with their lives, and he carried that trust like a sacred burden. The citadel was a massive structure, built over thousands of years to be the seat of galactic power. Its walls were thick enough to survive orbital bombardment. Its defenders numbered in the tens of thousands. Taking it would require fighting room by room, corridor by corridor, for every inch of ground. Adams did not hesitate. His people had not come this far to stop now. For 5 days, human soldiers and their allies pushed through the citadel. They fought in grand halls and narrow passages, in gardens and armories, in kitchens and throne rooms. The Council guards fought back with everything they had. By the 3rd day, Adams had lost a quarter of his forces. By the 4th day, half. On the 5th day, with barely 2,000 soldiers remaining, he reached the doors to the Grand Council chamber itself. The doors were ancient, carved from a metal that no longer existed in the galaxy, decorated with scenes of Council triumphs stretching back 10 millennia. They were designed to be impenetrable. Adams looked at them for a long moment. Then he ordered his engineers to plant charges. The explosion echoed through what remained of the citadel. When the smoke cleared, the doors that had stood for 10,000 years lay in ruins. Inside the chamber, the 12 council leaders waited. They wore their ceremonial robes and sat in their ancient seats of power, arranged in a circle as they had been for countless generations. Some looked afraid. Others looked angry. A few seemed almost relieved that it was finally over. Adams walked into the chamber with his rifle ready. He had expected a final stand, some desperate last attack. Instead, he found only tired old beings who had run out of options. "You are under arrest," he said simply. "By the authority of the Free People's Coalition, you will stand trial for crimes against sentient life. You will be judged by representatives of every species you have wronged." One of the council leaders, an ancient Keldari with silver scales, rose from his seat. "We built this civilization. We brought order to chaos. We created the peace you now destroy." Adams shook his head. "You built a prison. You brought suffering to billions. And what you called peace was just the silence of people too beaten to scream. He gestured to his soldiers. Take them. The council leaders did not resist. Perhaps they had expected execution and were confused by the restraints being placed on their wrists. Perhaps they simply had no fight left. Either way, the Galactic Council ended not with a final battle or a glorious last stand, but with 12 ancient criminals being led away in chains to face the judgment they had escaped for 10,000 years. 1 year later, the Galactic Assembly convened for the first time. The meeting was held on a station built specifically for this purpose, orbiting a star that belonged to no single species. Representatives from over 300 worlds gathered in a chamber designed to hold them all, beings of every shape and size united by a simple idea that all sentient life has value. The Assembly's charter was drafted primarily by human legal scholars, with input from every member species. It established rights that could never be taken away. It created systems of government that could never become tyranny. It built protections against the kind of power the Council had wielded. Jake Morrison, now ambassador to the Assembly, took his seat among the delegates. He was older than he had been when alien ships first appeared above Earth. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes still held the same fire that had made him refuse to surrender when surrender seemed like the only choice. A young Vexari approached him with a flower from her homeworld, a delicate purple bloom that only grew in freedom. She was perhaps 10 years old, born after the liberation, the first generation of her people to never know chains. Thank you, she said in careful English. She had been practicing for weeks. Thank you for coming for us. Morrison knelt down to accept the flower. We will always come, he said. That's what humanity does. We see people in trouble, and we help. It's just who we are. Across the galaxy, the trials of the council leaders were being broadcast. Witnesses from hundreds of worlds testified about what had been done to them. The guilty were judged and sentenced. Justice, real justice, was finally being served. The old order was gone. In its place, something new was growing. Something built on freedom instead of fear, on cooperation instead of control. Humanity had looked at the stars and found them ruled by tyrants, so they had done what they always did when faced with tyranny. They had fought. They had bled. They had refused to accept that some people were meant to be slaves and others meant to be masters. And when the fighting was over, they had built something better. The galaxy would never be the same. And sitting in the assembly chamber, watching 300 species work together as equals, Jake Morrison decided that was exactly the point. This was what humanity had always been moving toward. Not conquest, not empire, but a universe where every being could live free. They had finally arrived.